The views expressed on this show by guests and the host on issues outside of the 9/11 controlled demolition evidence are the opinions of those individuals alone and do not necessarily reflect those of architects and engineers for 9/11 truth.
All right, welcome to another episode of 9/11 Freefall. I am the host, Andy Steele, and we have a very special guest this week. It's sort of the theme that we are following here at AE 9/11 Truth, because by the time the show airs, you're going to have seen our latest article. It says that comments are disappearing from our YouTube videos, and guess what, folks? We're not the ones doing it. We've experimented with it. I can't tell you exactly what's going on, but it's been reported to us by a bunch of supporters. And this all comes with the fact that we have censorship going on YouTube of our information. And it's not just YouTube, it's Google, which owns YouTube, but it's of our information, it's of other alternative information. You do a Google search now, and pretty much you're going to get the mainstream narrative unless you want to go 100 tabs back, which most people don't have the patience to do. I'm going to talk about a few alternatives by the end of this program, but it's a great opportunity to bring on this very special guest. This is Zach Vorhies. He's a former Google employee who released 950 pages of internal documents to the Department of Justice outlining the company's program of censorship that is now corrupting search features on its platform as well as YouTube. This includes blacklists as well as secret page rank scores. We're going to get into some of that stuff. His book, which is on the left-hand side of me on the screen, he wrote this with Kent Heckin Lively. It's called Google Leaks, a Whistleblower's Exposé of Big Tech Censorship. We'll be hearing all about his story today and try to get a sense of what's going on there behind the scenes. So let's bring him on in. Zach, welcome to 9/11 Freefall.
Thanks, Andy. Good to be here.
All right, so I'm very familiar with your story. The guy who recommended me, or recommended you to me, I should say, is very familiar with your story. However, they don't seem to want to be advertising it as much in the mainstream. So please, before we get into all of the exciting stuff and things that you reveal, tell us about yourself before becoming a dissident from Google and how you got to be employed there.
Well, I guess I could consider myself sort of like a standard leftist liberal. And I believe that Google was pretty much the epitome of what good stewardship was within, the corporate world. In fact, I thought that Google was the answer to the problem of, the malfeasance of bad corporate control. But it turns out that that was completely wrong. It turns out that Google was a bad actor, a wolf in sheep's clothing. And that became apparent in 2016. But before that, they were all about, expressing yourself, took hard stances against censorship of any kind. And I really enjoyed, a company that was able to do that. And I was totally bought and sold by the idea of Google, and woke up every single day enjoying the job that I love to do.
And that's what a lot of people strive for in life. Obviously, you have a background that Google found important. What kind of work did you do when you were at Google?
So I was a software engineer in C++, so like really close to the metal sort of programmer. I worked with Google Earth, which was a company that was created by In-Q-Tel, which I learned later was the venture capital arm of the CIA and National Security State. And I did that for 5.5 years. And then I left to create a startup, which didn't go that well. And so I came back in 2016 and went to work for YouTube, which was, a really great company. And was, and my role at YouTube was to take the product and put it onto game consoles. So if you ever see like YouTube on the television or the PlayStation or the Xbox, that's basically my team, and that was the stuff that I was working on. In fact, I worked on the Nintendo Switch, the PlayStation 4, and the Xbox, with a lot of work going into the Xbox and a lot of work going into the Nintendo Switch. And so that was pretty much my role at the company. And then once stuff started getting crazy, I started kind of investing part-time and seeing what Google's up to with its AI censorship.
Right, and I want to get into that, but it sounds like it was a pretty, smooth sailing in the sense that you enjoyed your work down there. You were doing something that you loved, was meaningful to you, and I do know at some point Google's motto was "Don't be evil," because they did manage. I remember when Google was first coming up, because it used to be Yahoo was the big deal. It actually was my first email account outside of a university or anything like that, and then people started talking about doing a Google search, and then it just sort of cemented as the thing that everybody uses. And now it's gotten to a point, it's almost like saran wrap. You can use like saran wrap, the company owns the product and people associate the product with that company, even if another company makes their own version of it. Like even if people use another search engine, they'll say they're Googling it. That is how to capture a market, have your name associated with the product.
I still have my Yahoo Mail account too, so which I sometimes go on, and some certain services are tied. It's really hard to get rid of an email address because every now and then you find that there's some service that will send a reset code for a password reset to it.
I would love to have my old Yahoo from like 2000 or whatever, because there were people emailing me things about 9/11 that I ignored, and I would love to see some of that information again. So it's been said by you, and this was in your book, that you first started to notice some things after Trump got elected and after a particular weekly meeting. So go ahead, for our audience who hasn't read the book, tell them the story of that.
Yeah, so in 2016, the wrong presidential candidate got elected. And what happened was, it was a choice between Hillary Clinton and Trump. And I was kind of a disaffected liberal, like, Occupy Wall Street had happened. And so I thought that, okay, well, both sides are corrupt. And I really didn't think that Clinton was going to lose. I thought that, she was like, the whole system seemed to be shilling in her direction. And I remember that when Trump got elected, it was such a surprise to me that I remember just sort of waking up the day after and being like, wow, that was unexpected and kind of a hilarious result. Trump seemed to cause Trump derangement syndrome in a lot of different people, and I didn't really, fall under that spell. I thought that he was a little bit brass, but someone that had done an entrepreneurship stint, I had realized that we do have a problem with China, and there is a plan to sort of, implode the United States financially. And maybe we need someone that's a tough talker to go ahead and, fight back against all of that, all the problems with, trade in China and build that wall finally. And so I was actually kind of happy and laughing to myself that the specific event of Trump being elected had occurred. But apparently I was alone in that line of thinking, because when I came to, YouTube, it was almost like everyone, someone had died, literally. And I remember thinking that this is kind of weird how everyone at Google seems to be thinking that this is like a really, really bad situation. But I didn't realize how far up that sentiment had gotten until a week after Trump's inauguration. The company had essentially a struggle session at their weekly TGIF meeting. And at this TGIF meeting, which it happens weekly, the C-level executives voiced their displeasure at the election of the wrong president. And there was the CFO who broke down in tears, like on stage. And the CEOs were saying that this was a result of nationalism and that fake news needed to be, was a factor in his election, that Google needed to take a larger role in filtering that fake news, and that they were going to use machine learning in order to, remove that fake news from the internet. In fact, I remember that there was this question asked by one of the employees during the Q&A section about, what was the, most effective thing that Google had done for the election and, to influence it. And it was CEO Sundar Pichai who answered them, saying that it was the use of machine learning in order to combat fake news. And I remember thinking to myself, well, wait a minute, when did that become a policy? I thought that we were radically against interference of our, search engine and what it returned. When did we start defining fake news? And so that sort of led into a deep dive into the company. And as a full-time engineer, I could sort of just go around and see the different teams and what they were working on. And I started to realize that there were some design documents within Google that clearly laid out that they were going to search for fake news, that they were defining fake news. And what was interesting was in 4 out of the 5 examples of this one document about what fake news was, 4 out of the 5 examples all had to do with Hillary Clinton and suppressing stories about Clinton FBI agents dying around her. And what was interesting is that the news stories themselves seemed to actually be fake from blogs you'd never heard of before. But they were so close to the truth that I started to wonder to myself, well, is this really about, could the truth be a collateral damage, right? Because if you train something to say, okay, well, this is fake news and it actually is fake news, but it's so close to the truth that maybe the truth itself gets swept up in that censorship activity. And so I decided that this warranted further analysis and a further deep dive. And so I started to go down and try to figure out, well, what was the thing that was actually going to be censoring all this stuff. And as I started to dig down deeper, I found that there was such a system that was, not only mature, but actively being rolled out to all of Google's different search engines and services, including Google News, Google Search, YouTube, and that there were documents describing how to communicate this to middle management. And the name of this project was called Machine Learning Fairness. And essentially what machine learning fairness was the merging of critical race theory, kind of cultural Marxism, plus artificial intelligence. And as I read through this thing and all the propaganda internally surrounding it, I realized, well, this is sort of like the end of the free and open internet that we've all enjoyed. And if this thing is unleashed in its fullest potential, then it's pretty much game over for any sort of openness on the internet. And the problem is that people have no idea that this is being, unleashed. And the media and Google's gaslighting everyone, telling, well, there's no censorship against conservatives. But, it's very clear from what I'm able to see from these documents that there was intense political censorship. There was intense filtering going on. It was being done by, a social justice warrior in the form of an artificial intelligence system. And so I started to, download all these documents because I was like, this is mind blowing and people need to see what's going on here. At one point I did want to pull the trigger and leave the company, but I was convinced otherwise to stay on because there was basically no one else, like me that was doing this work. And it was Eric Weinstein that was telling me that I shouldn't quit, that I should stay in the belly of the beast and try to, figure out what was going on. And so that's what essentially I did. I stayed on and, continued to collect data. During the day, I would, be a loyal employee. But then once everyone went home, I would start to, look around and say, well, what is it that everyone's doing? And so this continued on for, essentially years. By 2017, I had figured out that, okay, well, this needs to get to a proper media channel that can do it justice. And so, and it was actually sort of the straw that broke the camel's back was when I saw the word covfefe being eliminated from the English translation dictionary in order to try to invoke the 25th Amendment on Donald Trump.
Yeah, can you just briefly tell that story? Because I heard that from your book, and that is creepy, that entire instance and how Google was able to pull this off. Can you just elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, so Trump went to Saudi Arabia, and he spent like 2 weeks there. And when he came back, he basically made a tweet that said, despite the constant negative press, covfefe. And what was interesting about this was that this word covfefe was translating by Google's translation services to "we will stand up." So, what Trump was saying with this tweet, if you put it all together, was, despite the negative constant press, we will stand up. And apparently this caused such a fit within the media system that, the New York Times literally wrote a hit piece about this word covfefe. And they said it doesn't exist, and And the expert that they used in order to justify this was someone that had been a former employee of the company as a contractor. And so they wrote up this huge article about how covfefe was nonsense and Trump was tweeting nonsense. And so Google, in their, in all of their majesty, decided that they were going to, censor this word. But what was really interesting is that they wrote a design document specifying that it was nonsense. And what they said they were going to do is replace it with an Easter egg, which was a icon of someone giving a shrug. Like, I don't know what this is, but in reality, what they did is they just deleted the word and, eliminated it from existence. And then what happened after that is, the newspapers, the Washington Post, were running articles saying we need to invoke the 25th Amendment against President Trump because he's tweeting nonsense, right? That was the justification. They literally used this word, covfefe, in order to try to remove a sitting president. It's like nuts. And from the inside, I realized that, the reason why they're making this argument that, he's tweeting nonsense is because they made it nonsense. Like, it wasn't nonsense prior to Google's deletion of this word. And what's interesting is that, with these bug reports that were filed against this word, the team that was responsible for the elimination of this word was called the Derrida team, which for me was really interesting because there's a postmodernist by the name of Jacques Derrida, and he advocated for the elimination of language in order to change society. And so I thought that it was really interesting that the team that was responsible for eliminating this word literally called themselves the Derrida team. I mean, is that a coincidence, or is, or am I just reading too deeply into things? But, it is what it is, right? The Derrida team went in, they created all of this, documentation for why this word needed to be removed from their translation dictionary, and they did that. And then, the 25th Amendment was being attempted to being used against the sitting president. So I thought to myself, sitting there reading this, with my mind being blown, thinking, is this an act of insurrection against the sitting president? And now that I know about this, I'm now involved in a conspiracy, and now complicit in it unless I do something, right? And so that was sort of it. I was like, okay, I need to take this information, and I need to start finding someone that can disclose it. And who else better to disclose it than Project Veritas? And so I was able to get a hold of that media organization, and pretty much they sent a handler out to San Francisco, where I live, and over the course of months gained my trust, and eventually handed off all the documentation to that organization. And then about a year passed, nothing happened. I decided that I had had enough with the censorship. I really hated my job. I was paid really well, but I just didn't like the censorship, didn't like being part of the system. And so while writing my resignation letter for the company, I got a call from Joe Halderman, the executive producer of Project Veritas, and he was like, "Hey, I want you to read this transcript." And I was like, "Okay." And so I read this transcript, and it turned out that it was a transcript by, Jen Janai, the director of trust and safety, and she had been, there was a sting operation that had been done. She was brought into a local Mexican restaurant down the street from where I live by an undercover, and after a few drinks, she admitted that only something the size of Google could stop the next Trump situation. And so they took this disclosure and they kind of married it with my, internal documents, and they were able to, release sort of like one of the biggest stories that they had ever done. It was the biggest story they had done up to that point. But going back to being on the phone with them, I basically gave my analysis, and I kind of went on a little rant about how they were finally able to get them to say in their own words what I had leaked to them. And, what they said to me was, "That's great. Could you come to New York and say that, in front of a camera anonymously?" And I said, "Absolutely." Right. In fact, I'm about to resign right now. And I hung up the phone, and I remember realizing what a fortunate turn of events, that I would get a call right as I'm writing my resignation letter. Just an incredible coincidence. And so, I finished up the resignation letter. It was the best resignation letter and the only resignation letter I'd ever written. And I submitted it, and immediately it got placed under investigation by the global security team within Google. Global network security is what they called themselves. And I guess they'd seen that I was a little bit too curious about the internal documents. And so they wanted to ask me some questions. And obviously I was done with the company. So I said, "No, I'm not going to answer any questions with HR. I'm done with the company. I'm sending in my resignation letter." And so in response to that, they immediately cut off my email access, my key card, and which was fine because I had a plane scheduled for the next day to go to New York. And that made things a lot easier. And so I went to New York, got into the hot seat. And it was funny, when I arrived in New York, I assumed that I would at least get a night's sleep and talk about what it was we're gonna make this video. But James O'Keefe, who picked me up personally, took me immediately to the recording studio. I guess he didn't want to waste any time at all, give me no time to change my mind. And we got in there, and they put me in a raincoat and put a jacket over me and a hat, and they blacked out my face. And then I basically told them what was going on, what machine learning fairness was, how the censorship at YouTube was working, how they data mined every single person's audio to pick out keywords and apply AI features. So features it's like a label, like they basically classify it under different categories, like right-wing talk show or conspiracy show, right? Like your show would probably be labeled as conspiracy and fringe. And from these data labels, sort of like points would get assigned. And once you got above a certain threshold, then certain actions were being taken. For example, your video could be demonetized, or you get a strike, or if the offending content was too big, then and you got too many points, then your channel would just be outright banned from that one video that you uploaded. And so this had confirmed what a lot of people had suspected was going on, but they were being gaslit by Google and the media. I mean, Google went to Congress and testified that there was no bias in the search engine at all. And so, by laying out the specifics of how they were censoring their news, their search engine, their YouTube engine, we were able to bring a lot of conspiracy theory into conspiracy fact. But when we released this, which was in June of 2019, I hadn't really come out. And so, and the story was huge, right? It was like what everyone was talking about for like a week. And it was my intention that I was going to be able to leak this and just sort of disappear, and no one would actually ever know that it was actually me that was the leaker, and I'd kind of keep this little secret to myself. But unfortunately, Google had other plans, and what their plans were to sort of come after me with a high-priced law firm, and anonymous trolls within Google started harassing me online, calling me the leaker and telling me I should change my bio because my bio said well-employed tech geek in Silicon Valley. And but at the time, we didn't really know whether it was Google or not. And so we set up a trap in order to catch them. And what happened was one of my friends started arguing with them on Twitter and gave them a link to an image, which they clicked. And that image was hosted on a server that he controlled. And so he was able to get the access logs from that server and see the IP address of these anonymous trolls. And from that IP address, we were able to reverse geocode it into a location. And from that location, we saw that it was coming from Google, Indiana. And so we're like, okay, well, these trolls are from Google, and the law firm is coming to destroy me and drain my finances. And so I decided that I needed to, put up a dead man switch. And so I went to Twitter. Well, first I called James O'Keefe and I said, hey, in the event of my unfortunate death, because I thought there was a high probability they could kill me, I said, the event of my untimely death, all documents will become public. And so, and then I went to Twitter and I posted the same thing. In fact, I actually have a picture of the tweet in my book here, which I'll refer to. And it looks like this. And it says, in the event of my, unfortunate death, full public disclosure. Now, YouTube was monitoring my Twitter account, so they saw that, and so they decided that they were going to call in the police on that. And there's something called a wellness check, which any company or individual can do. And what it does is it gets a police officer to come to your house to check you out. And so that's what happened to me, and it happened within like an hour of me tweeting that. And so the police came to my house, but I pretended that I wasn't there. But the neighbors decided that they were going to let them in through the gate. And from the gate, they were able to, knock on the door. I had not closed the door all the way until it went click. So the door kind of swung open and they were able to start coming inside. Fortunately for me, I've got a large staircase. And so they can't see in from that staircase. And so I was up there at the top of it, lying down on my stomach, listening to them kind of debating whether they should come in or not. Well, they came in enough to see that I had certain lights within the, I like to do LED lighting, programmable, monitors your location and then turns on. They saw that LED lighting and they're like, oh, this could be like a bomb or an incendiary device. And that was justification enough for them to escalate and to call in the bomb squad, who sent in bomb robots. And once the bomb squad gets called in, the FBI gets called in and the sheriff gets called in. And there were 4 different law enforcement agencies now at my house. And, then the news media got called. So there's helicopters over my house. And I was sort of like in denial that this was happening to me, because I was like, what are the chances that this has been escalated to something that's, where there's police helicopters, above my house? But sure enough, there was. And I could tell because, when I looked outside, crawling around in my house, I saw that there was a helicopter, about 100 feet away or something, above my window, looking down into it. And I said, okay, this might be for me. This is either a double homicide that just happened to happen next to my house when all this is going down, or this is for me. And so, the police, I kept on getting like nonstop calls from unidentified numbers from within San Francisco. Eventually I answered it, and it was the police saying, hey, we're going to, we know you're in there, like, come on out. And I said, well, what if I don't come out? And they said, well, we're just going to stay put. And we're going to be here for days on end until you come out. And so I was like, well, I guess I've got two choices. I can either wait it out and see what they do, or, and under that scenario, they'll likely come in, and who knows what could happen. And if something bad were to happen, their body cam would probably fail, right, for some mysterious reasons. And so I said, well, if I go out into the public, they're not going to do anything bad because everyone's going to be having their, mobile phones out and about. And so I decided that I was going to go outside and I was going to meet them and let everyone record the situation. And so I negotiated with them for that surrender, told them I was going to come out, told them that I was going to have my phone on me, told them that, what I told them, how I sold it was, let's keep the amount of paperwork you have to do after this encounter to a minimum. Like, I'm not going to do anything. I'm just a software engineer. I'm not violent. I don't have a criminal record. Let's keep the paperwork low, and we'll get through this, without incident. And they seemed really cool with that. So I came out with my hands up, and they kind of surprised, like, came out of a corner, grabbed my hands, put it behind my back, detained me, brought me over, and then asked me a bunch of questions of, whether I wanted to harm myself or anybody else, whether I should be on drugs right now, or whether I was on any drugs. And then, after answering normally for all the questions, they were like, well, why would Google do this? And that's when I was like, aha, I knew that Google was behind this wellness check. And I said, probably because I'm a whistleblower blowing the whistle on Google. And they said, well, do you have any evidence of that? And I said, well, in fact, I do. And I pulled out my phone and I had a letter that I'd written to the DOJ with an evidence box that I had submitted to the DOJ, detailing, all of Google's censorship with the 950 pages that I printed out physically and sent to them in an evidence box. And so once the police officer saw that, he's like, okay, you really are Google, or you are a whistleblower. And I said, yep. And then everything de-escalated from there. I had a burning question, which I wanted to ask the police officers. And that was, what is the best cop show on television? Is it CSI, and they said, no. It's none of those things. There's only one show that's scary accurate, and it's Reno 911. And it was funny because it was the sheriff's department, the FBI, the bomb squad, and San Francisco PD. They all agreed and laughed because they all said that was by far scary accurate, and a real depiction of how police operate, which I thought was absolutely hilarious, right? Who would have known that Reno 911 is actually, scary accurate to how police, operate. And so, after that ended, that I decided that I needed to get out of San Francisco. I was being monitored on Twitter by Google essentially. And so I realized that they were going to continue coming after me. They wanted to get the law firm that Google sent wanted to get all of my internal documents that I had, including the laptop from the work, which I still had as well, which kind of is a reasonable request, but I didn't want to give it because that would be evidence of how I exfiltrated the data out of the company. And so my solution for that was realizing that, well, the laptop is part of a crime scene. And so who better to have this evidence than law enforcement? So I had previously sent that to the DOJ. And so I decided that it was getting too hot for me to handle and I needed to get out of San Francisco. And so I got on a plane, went to DC, went into a safe house, regrouped with some friends to figure out what to do next. And then went to Project Veritas again in New York. And then we decided that we were going to unmask who I was, because that was going to be the only way that Google was going to get off my back, is to disclose everything, right? Because if there's a bunch of information that someone has, you're going to try to stop them from doing that disclosure. But if everything's disclosed, then there's no reason to pursue that individual anymore. So I realized that the only way that I was going to get out of this, possibly with my life, was just to get everything out there and let the public know what was going on. And so, that's what we did. And we released all 950 pages to the public. It was another huge story. All the researchers from around the world, accessed these documents to see how Google did their censorship. And it was this amazing burden to have lifted off my soul to be able to, disclose this to the public and to show specifically through the code itself how, this ranking, filtering, censorship system was actually working. And we took what was conspiracy theory and we moved it to conspiracy fact. And that felt really, 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 really good. And so, following that, I was like, okay, well, now that we know that they're going to censor, maybe we can stop this thing. And then, 2 months later, there were rumors that there was a virus going around in China. I released in August of 2019. In October of 2019 was the Event 201 games in Wuhan, China. Talking about a hypothetical situation that a virus could, escape and set the world on fire. And also what was happening is that there were other whistleblowers coming out with Project Veritas. They'd set up this pipeline, and I was pretty certain that Trump was going to get reelected from all of this. Once we knew that Google was censoring, it was my hope that maybe we could stop this insane misinformation that was being done by this, mainstream media collusion complex. But unfortunately, that virus sort of set the world on fire, and everything got stranger. And it's pretty much continued on since that virus release. I'm not going to go into the details of that, but I'm sure that you've got some ideas of, what was going on with that. But they changed a lot of election laws, and now we're sitting where we are today, on the cusp of World War III and a Great Depression, all at the same time.
Yeah, hence why I still do this. Now, our strategy, we focus just on the World Trade Center. To me, it's like the smoking gun of everything that's going on in the world right now, and we just keep on beating on that. But I'm not in a bubble. I know what's going on in the world. But there's a lot to unravel there, and it's a fascinating story. It makes me angry hearing your story because this whole wellness check thing that they called on you when you haven't even broken the law and you've got helicopters over your door, that shows the extent to which these big companies like Google, and that's an understatement saying a big company. I don't even know what the right word to use. Way too powerful to be able to use law enforcement to exact their revenge and to be sending people to harass you. I know about that. A lot of that goes on against change makers and whistleblowers and things like this. So let me just unravel a little bit here. I don't mean to harp on this Covfefe thing, but I just want to know, because just to boil it down for our audience, remind them, Trump says something about Covfefe, part of his political rhetoric, I guess, coming back from an Arabic country. His opposition has some issue with that. So Google essentially is able to make it seem like this guy doesn't know what he's talking about, that he's just making up this word. And the 25th Amendment, in case our audience missed that or didn't know what was being referenced there, the 25th Amendment is an amendment where the president can be removed if he is not of sound mind. For instance, if he gets shot but survives and he's in a coma, all you have to do, I believe, is have a letter from the cabinet to the Congress, and then the vice president would step up. So it's a way of keeping, if a president goes crazy, that you can remove him without an impeachment process. So they're using this to invoke the 25th Amendment. Now, I can tell there's probably half the audience who doesn't like Trump is getting lost in the idea that we're saying unfavorable things about Trump's opposition. My main issue is 9/11 truth, which wasn't the hot button issue of 2016 when all of this was going on. They were focused on Trump. But from what I have seen, it seems like our topic has been swept up in all of this as part of the fake news that they're talking about. So whether or not you like Trump, dislike Trump, doesn't matter. It affects you if you care about 9/11 truth, our issue. So we need to know something about this. Now, I'm not even familiar with Arabic or any of this stuff. How powerful is Google to, like, for instance, wipe out the meaning of a word from their searches? Can they actually do that? If they decide tomorrow that videos of Building 7 coming down don't need to be seen by anyone anymore searching on Google, can they just take out all reference to World Trade Center 7, or is that an exaggeration?
Oh, yeah. And the way that they can take that out is they've got several mechanisms. The simplest one is they just put on to a blacklist, which is one of the things that I, revealed in my disclosure was a blacklist called the YouTube query blacklist. And it's funny because Google was denying that they used any blacklists, and all I had to do to prove otherwise was do a search on their code search for blacklists, and they literally named it blacklist.txt. Right? It was pretty hilarious how brazen they were. So this thing was called blacklists, and or the YouTube controversial query blacklist.txt. And what they do is that they insert words, and when those words or phrases match, the title or description of content, your video goes into a black hole, and it's still technically there. It's just unsearchable and unfindable, and it might as well be unlisted. And so that's how they do censorship through the blacklist. When I was there, they were rolling out artificial intelligence to be able to understand for deeper semantic analysis of what the content was, so that they could also search through the content of the video, right? Like the audio transcription. And you can see that they're doing this to a wide number of videos. In fact, you can just open up the transcripts for a lot of videos and just download it yourself. And so, this is what they're using in order to censor content. Now, they don't want, when they do a censorship situation, that generates negative feedback. So they'd rather have plausible deniability. And so what they like to do is they like to just downrank it, right? And so the way that they downrank it is a system called BitTwiddler. It's a ranking system, and what it does is upstream of that video, there's labels that are applied by artificial intelligence, and when it comes through to this BitTwiddler system, it then re-ranks the video according to the AI features that have been applied to it. And then from that ranking system, you get a list of results. And if you haven't been, hit with this, negative feature, then, your video goes to the top. And if you haven't, then it goes all the way to the back, or it's not even shown at all. And that's essentially how they're doing censorship across all their different products.
Now, I'm going to take advantage of the fact that you're here. You may not know, because there could be developed, but that there's people out there who try to create a show like this, and they get frustrated because they might only get 30 views on their video and whatnot. Do you know of anything that's going on with view counts and Google that, maybe a video has 700, only 100 are being registered, things like that?
Yeah, I've seen them actually chop view counts down, for videos, and likes and dislikes. It's kind of hard to prove because it's ephemeral, right? I'd have to be recording the screen to be able to, prove it. But I've seen it happen. Twitter's also doing this. Facebook was also doing this. It's pretty standard across the industry. Also, what's also interesting is when certain content needs to be boosted, it's my belief that the intelligence systems have a botnet that's going through and pushing up, view counts. And the way that I've been able to figure out when something gets artificially boosted is there is a pretty stable comment ratio for the number of likes that something gets. And so if you want to see if something's getting artificially boosted, just see that it's got a lot of views and not very many people commenting. If you want to see whether it's under bot commenting, just see that all of the different comments are low quality. Now, the problem is that now we've got artificial intelligence, and so all that stuff can be deep faked, right? Like deep fake views, deep fake comments, and artificial boosting. And things are going to get really wild going forward here, in my opinion. Hi, they were having connection issues.
All right, and now as you talk about my internet, yes, we are. My internet is going wanky. I don't know if I'm going to be the one blurry or you're going to be the blurry. So we're going to wait for that to fix itself. It tends to happen in some things here in the program. But just as we're talking and as the can you still hear me while we're talking?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're good now. They're resolved.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. Very good. Good. All right. I mean, this is a lot of stuff that people have been noticing on their own. I remember back in the days, there were people in the quote unquote conspiracy world warning that YouTube is just going to be a glorified cable box, that you're not going to be able to get the same information. And, here's naive, ignorant me saying, well, I type in 9/11 truth. There's AE 9/11 truth. There's Niels Harrit. There's David Ray Griffin. It all comes right up. Right now, they're going to have a hard time keeping this under control. But now here we are in 2023 talking about this and dealing with the consequences. I also want to ask you about this. We have this article detailing this. Basically, to boil down the situation is we're getting reports, and I've tested it myself, that you can leave comments on our videos. They may be supportive. They may not even be supportive. Who knows? But like if you're logged in under a particular Google account, for instance, let's just say Andy1 hypothetically at gmail.com. I might type it in. I'll see it. But then I go in and log in under Andy2, and I can no longer see it anymore. And our supporters are seeing this. They think that we're shadow banning them for leaving supportive comments. And we're not doing this. We had no idea this was going on until we started running these tests and noticing it ourselves. Again, if you can't answer, that's fine. But from your knowledge and experience, what do you have to say about that situation?
Right. Well, they don't want to let the shadow banning be too obvious. And so what they do is that they do this thing where it looks like your comment's there, but other people can't see it. And so, this is a standard tool of all these social media companies. It's being done worldwide. It's being done in Japan as well. It's covert. It's a covert influence operation is what it is. What they want to do is they want to take away your supporters. They don't want to have you outright be banned, because if they outright ban you, then their users are going to go to alternative sites, and then they've got a problem. And so, in my opinion, what they're trying to do is they're trying to kettle you onto the mainstream programs and keep you there, but then degrade your ability to reach your users over time. And so I think that will continue for the foreseeable future. And then what's going to happen is that when they have a big influence event like, the 2024 election, that's when, the hammer is going to come down. And then all of a sudden it's going to get real ugly until the election passes.
Yeah, well, that's always the storm time, and I think that 2024 is going to make 2020 look like a day at church, especially if Trump comes back. And again, I'm not saying this from a pro-Trump or anti-Trump perspective. I'm just looking at the facts and making predictions based on the past here. And we can see this. And, part of the problem is our supporters think that we're the ones doing it, and that we're like these gatekeepers, that we're trying to keep their information off, and that somehow we're controlled opposition as a result of it. There's a heavy propaganda campaign going on social media against people here and all of that. And I think it just sort of goes along in line with this. So no, we're not the ones doing it. I don't know what we can do anything about it. We have our login to the account, and that is the extent to which we have any control over these things. We are on other social media platforms, Rumble, Odyssey, those kinds of sites. I don't run that. We have another guy that takes care of that stuff for us, takes care of our Twitter. So we are trying to get out there, but you got to share the links to these other services. I'm saying this to the supporters out there. And so that hopefully as more people become aware that you can get more truthful information more easily on these services, there's a slow migration to them, and then YouTube suffers the fate that they deserve to suffer by getting less people on the platform. Part of the issue, though, is that everybody is used to YouTube, Google, and all of those things. That's how people get their information out, the regular folks I'm talking about. They get their information from those. They're not dealing with anything that the system really wants to censor. So unfortunately, it's tough to get the new people in that way. Like I noticed when I first started waking up to 9/11 Truth, YouTube wasn't owned by Google yet. They used to have the videos with the most views right on the front page, and a lot of times it'd be things like Loose Change or some other 9/11 Truth related video, and then they started changing the front page, what was featured on there, to what's hot, which is a very subjective designation. And then the most viewed got relegated to a back page, and then you don't see that anymore, as far as I've seen up on YouTube. So yeah, we're definitely battling these things. Big campaign against any kind of alternative information. I only see it from our end at AE. I know it's hot and heavy against us. We're doing our best to fight it. What can we do? I mean, at AE 9/11 Truth, but there's other groups out there stumping for an issue. What do you do about all this if you're us, regular people?
One of the things you can do is you can simulcast to different systems, right? Like use the power of the market to get your word out there through the different networks, right? Like there's Rumble, there's BitChute, there's Odyssey. These are alternative places you need to simulpost. And I know that there's services, I can't remember what they're called, but they allow you to post in multiple places at the same time, just doing one upload. So that's number one that I would do, right? And the knock-on effects of that are that YouTube's going to be more hesitant to censor you, knowing that you're simulcasting to multiple places at the same time. You're going to want to go ahead and say that in your video. Also find us, on Rumble. Another thing that I would do is I would have a censored version that you release on YouTube, and then an uncensored longer version that you release on like Rumble or one of these other sites. And that works really well to sort of stem the censorship, because YouTube is going to sit there and going to go, well, if we censor them, then that's just going to push more people over to these other systems. Another thing you can do is have an editor go through and, censor certain things that you're saying with a bleep, right? Like, puts like a black box over your mouth. What that does is that shows the censors at YouTube that you're actively, you're not flagrantly trying to, violate their content policies, that you're making a good faith effort to comply with what it is that they're trying to do. And it also sort of signals to the audience in a hilarious way that what you're saying is censored, and that the control apparatus doesn't like what it is that you're talking about, which actually lends a lot of credibility to what you say, right? Like if you go on and you talk about, thermite being, found, the steel beams and outside the World Trade Center, how they bulldozed it, right? And then you go into a long, beep as you're saying that, then people are going to be like, oh, what's this guy saying, right? And the censorship is like in your face. What's interesting is that the fact that, you can sort of say what you say without, without censoring yourself, sort of almost diminishes the effect of what it is that you're saying, right? Because if it's truly dangerous, then it's worth censoring, right? That's what dangerous truth is. And so my thing would be to do an obvious censor for what it is that you're saying, and then have the uncensored version on Odyssey or Rumble and divert people to that. So that's my advice.
Yeah, I believe, because 9/11 Truth, I think, caught them by surprise. This particular subject, you had Loose Change became the first internet blockbuster, and then other people started speaking out, people like Stephen Jones holding their presentations and such, and I don't think they counted on so many people just sort of getting involved and creating MySpace pages, those kinds of things. So it's almost like 9/11 Truth has been grandfathered in. People know it's a thing that has existed on the internet. Then when you had new kind of opposition issues, and you had the whole Trump thing going on, that the system, for whatever reason, I'm not going to get involved in politics, they did not seem to like that guy. Then it seemed like a bridge too far, and hence why we saw the crackdown. And again, we got swept into that. Where can we get a copy of the blacklist, to your knowledge? Is this still floating around on internet, or do you have it on one of your servers?
I do actually have it on my server. You can go to zachvorhies.com/blacklists. And from there, you're able to see all the blacklists that I released to the public. You're going to see 40 pages of controversial terms that YouTube censored. And what's funny is that half of those terms have to do with the Las Vegas massacre. And 95% in total have to do with mass terror attacks that may or may not have been done by the intelligence services. people searching for things like David Hogg forgets his lines, and is this a false flag? Like, YouTube is very, very, very particular about censoring anyone looking for evidence that a certain mass terror attack has actually been done by the intelligence services and maybe a false flag attack. They are super on top of that. And so you can make your own conclusions about what's going on there.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you what, here at AE 9/11 Truth, what we're doing and the fact that we focus on the science of World Trade Center 9/11 coming down and the fact these buildings were brought down with controlled demolitions. I say it all the time behind the scenes. We are digging up the septic system of America. Of course, we're going to get some of it on us and what comes up when you dig up a septic system. I don't need to say it. But so we expect it. We expect the hard times. We expect the opposition. And we always figure out a way to come out on top in the end, or at least to continue staying, keep our staying power, keep this message out there. And I do it. I'm motivated by the fact that the system doesn't like that. In our last few minutes, what kind of an effect did you see? Do you see that the tide is turning in any way against Google continuing to do this, or do you just see them moving on and increasing the censorship unless there's some major shakeup in this country somehow?
So there's a couple of fronts that happened after I did this disclosure. First off, the DOJ immediately sent a letter to Google in July of 2019 with the retention order for all their email. They said, don't delete any email, you're under investigation. And what just came out a month ago was that, oops, Google forgot to do that. Or they let their employees handle the retention settings, and then they didn't update anything, and so all the emails got deleted. So the DOJ is not going to like that. We'll see what happens with what the DOJ is actually going to do. I know that there's antitrust investigations going on right now. The censorship did stop immediately. Like once I did this, it didn't stop, but it kind of took a pause for a while. And that pause seemed to last until COVID happened, and then it ramped up again. But the most important aspect of this is that, it paralyzed the company. These leaks were a really big deal for the whole company. And I remember being at the company in 2012 when China hacked Google Gmail to get dissident information. And so they decided that, okay, they need to lock down everything with security. And it was actually my hope that this disclosure would, essentially wreck Google's business model of being open and transparent internally and make them lock everything down, right? Because they've got this sort of, like the way propaganda works within this company is that if they're kind of open internally, then there's this sense that what they're doing isn't even wrong, right? Because they don't even need to hide it. But now that I've leaked everything that I did, now Google locks everything down. And now when you're doing something really bad, you're like, oh, there's a bunch of secrecy here, and what I might be doing is really evil. And so what I want to sort of get into the leftists' mind and sort of give them this idea that what they're doing may not be that good, right? And that sort of locking everything down feels like that. Like it's probably like working at the CIA. Like, oh, keep this on the DL, don't share this, don't make it public, have a list of people that have access to the document. And the effect that has on a corporation is enormous. Like it just wrecks everything, right? Because now in order to get access to a document, you have to go through layers of bureaucracy. And so that was actually one of my main hopes that this would happen. And it did. And now they've got crushing bureaucracy and they can no longer be nimble enough to move forward. And now it looks like the search engines are going to have a decline as these chatbots come out and give us our answers that we want anyways. And Google seems pretty late to the party on this. And really, Google pretends that they've got all these different companies and services, or at least they did. All others have been sort of dying on the vine, except their phone business, their search business, and YouTube, right? That's what they're known for now. But really, they're an ad company. And what's really interesting is that search engines are on their way out. And what's going to happen is that we're going to get a chatbot. And it's really hard to put ads on a chatbot And so, in my opinion, Google's entire business model is already dead. But they're just going through the motion. So I think they're going to collapse in the next 5 years unless they are able to transform their AI department. I mean, I think what will probably happen is that they'll make good strides with artificial intelligence and then, abandon everything else, or it'll collapse or something like that. Or as it's collapsing, the DOJ will come in and go in for the kill. So at least it looks like it happened externally, so that the collusion force that really runs the world can get justification for, oh, this company is really bad and now we need to have more communism as the solution. And so that's my prediction, is that as Google's business dies, the DOJ will swoop in and then they'll basically say, oh, you're a monopoly. And then that's going to cover up for the fact that Google was going to die anyways. But they'll use that as a justification for regulating online activities. And that will be the end result of this. So... But whatever. I mean, the great thing is that right now the new upstarts, there's a competitive field in artificial intelligence, and so I think we're going to have a large plethora of services out there. The big problem right now is YouTube and their censorship, but we've got a blossoming market right now of different service providers that are able to get around a lot of the censorship. Sometimes it feels like you're preaching to the choir. We still have this big problem where we've got propaganda sites like, Reddit that just viciously censor everything, and that a lot of normies sort of gravitate towards these big centralized services. But, and there really needs to be an alternative to Reddit, and there doesn't seem to be right now. But there does seem to be a Reddit alternative to YouTube, and that's Rumble and BitChute and Odyssey. And so, we've got a flourishing online marketplace. Oh yeah, and by the way, like Apple Podcasts don't censor that much, and that's where a lot of people are finding amazing amount of traction. So, I am hopeful that going forward we're going to have a more open public sphere which we can discuss things that have actually happened. But we'll see what happens with World War III and whether that kicks off or fades into the background. I don't really know.
God, I hope not. So I just want to tell folks, in our last 30 seconds here, I promised some solutions. Here's my solution. Entire web. I've been trying that. It's a more honest search. You can get more information of what you're looking for. There may be other ones that are even better. I'm just telling you from my experience, that's what I've been using for quite a while to try to circumvent Google censorship. They can give you a more detailed explanation of what they do to get those searches if you go there. I think it's on their About Us page, but entireweb.com, entire and then web. Try that out and write in and tell us what you think of it. Zach, thank you so much for spending a little bit over a few minutes of an hour with me today, and for informing our supporters and helping us deal with the latest censorship that we've documented. And good luck to you on blowing the whistle and continuing your own personal mission.
Thank you, Andy.
Today.
It's been a pleasure. Take care.